the tanks stop first. Not because they're destroyed. Not because the crew is dead. They stop because there is nothing left to burn. The engine coughs. The needle drops. Silence. The crew waits for orders that never come. The radio crackles with nothing but static. Around them, other tanks sit dark and lifeless, lined up like gravestones. No explosions. No heroics. Just stillness. And in war, stillness is death. Because when fuel disappears, war doesn't slow down. It doesn't retreat. It doesn't adapt. It ends quietly and without mercy. 1. Fuel is not a resource. You can replace soldiers. You can rebuild weapons. You can redesign tactics. But fuel is different. Without fuel, a battleship becomes a floating prison. A fighter plane becomes a statue. An army becomes a crowd of men waiting to be erased. Fuel is the substance that turns machines into power. Remove it, and the illusion collapses instantly. World War II was the first war where movement meant survival. Armies no longer marched, they drove. Navies no longer waited for wind, they burned oil. Air forces no longer soared, they consumed fuel by the ton. Every modern doctrine assumed one thing: the fuel would always be there. For Germany, Italy, and Japan, it wasn't. 2. Germany, speed without blood. Blitzkrieg was not genius. It was dependency. Germany's entire strategy depended on motion. Tanks advancing, trucks supplying, aircraft supporting. Motion required fuel. Fuel required supply. Early victories hid the truth. Captured stockpiles kept engines running. France collapsed before shortages mattered. But when Germany pushed east, distance exposed the lie. By winter 1941, German units weren't losing battles. They were losing mobility. Tanks sat abandoned on roadsides. Fuel convoys never arrived. Mechanized divisions reverted to horses. Horses. The most technologically advanced army in Europe was dragging itself forward with animals because the fuel equation had broken. By 1944, the collapse was undeniable. New tanks sat unused in forests. Pilots trained in gliders. Panzer divisions existed on paper, not on roads. When Normandy happened, Germany didn't fail to respond. It couldn't. The fuel wasn't delayed. It wasn't rationed. It was gone. 3. Italy, a navy that couldn't move. Italy's navy looked terrifying. Battleships, cruisers, submarines. But naval power is a fuel equation. Every sortie burns oil. Every maneuver drains reserves. Every mistake is irreversible. Italy had ships, but no oil. Battleships stayed in port because sailing them once could consume weeks of fuel. Engagements were avoided not from fear, but arithmetic. British forces didn't need to destroy the fleet. They just waited. The Regia Marina slowly transformed into something worse than defeated. Irrelevant. By 1942, the fleet existed, but it could not fight. It could not escort. It could not protect supply lines. When Italy surrendered, much of its navy was still intact. Not because it had succeeded, but because it had been immobilized. For Japan, fuel as destiny. Japan's fuel crisis was even more existential. The entire reason Japan went to war was to secure oil. The American embargo had strangled its economy, its military, its future. The invasion of Southeast Asia wasn't about expansion, it was about survival. Capture the oil fields. Refine the oil. Ship it home. Keep the war machine alive. For a brief moment, it worked. Japanese forces seized the Dutch East Indies, one of the richest oil-producing regions in the world. Victory seemed inevitable. But controlling oil fields and using that oil are two completely different problems. Transporting oil across the Pacific required tankers. Tankers required escorts. Escorts required fuel. Refining crude oil required infrastructure, time, and security. And all of it was under constant attack. American submarines began hunting Japanese tankers with ruthless efficiency. Every tanker sunk was thousands of barrels lost. Every convoy delayed was another week of empty tanks. By 1944, Japan was producing oil it couldn't ship, refining oil it couldn't deliver, and operating a military it couldn't fuel. The Imperial Japanese Navy, the force that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor, was withering in port. Training flights were canceled. Pilots were sent into combat with minimal experience because there wasn't enough fuel for proper instruction. Veteran pilots died. Replacements arrived undertrained. The cycle accelerated. By 1945, the fuel situation was so catastrophic that Japan resorted to kamikaze tactics, not out of fanaticism, but out of desperation. A one-way mission requires half the fuel of a round trip. It was an admission that the war was already over. The planes could take off, but they couldn't come back. The battleships could move, but they couldn't maneuver. The Empire could still fight, but it couldn't win. When the super battleship Yamato was sent on its final mission, it carried only enough fuel for a one-way journey. The largest, most powerful warship ever built by Japan was being used as a suicide weapon because there wasn't enough oil to bring it home. 5. Stillness is the end state of collapse. Fuel shortages don't weaken armies. They erase them. First, movement slows. Then operations shrink. Then training stops. Then strategy disappears. The battlefield doesn't decide the outcome. The supply chain does. Germany, Italy, and Japan all learned this the same way. Their machines stopped moving. And once that happens, war is already over. Even if the shooting continues. Modern war is not fought by soldiers. It's fought by machines. And machines need fuel the way living things need blood. When the fuel stops, the machine dies. There is no recovery. There is no substitute. There is only the slow realization that the war is over, even if the fighting continues. Germany, Italy, and Japan all learned this lesson the same way. They built empires on steel and speed, and watched them collapse into stillness and silence the moment the fuel ran dry. In war, the most dangerous enemy is not the one you see. It's the one you don't. And fuel is the enemy you never see until it's already gone.